Beware the Ides of March.
What are the Ides of March?
The Ides of March are the 15th of March, the middle day of the month of March, of the Roman month of March. If you've heard of the Ides of March, you've probably heard beware the Ides of March.
Beware the Ides of March.
And that's because in 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March. It seems to be the case that there's some premonition that this was going to happen. Shakespeare preserves this, but it's in the ancient accounts too, that a soothsayer had told him, beware the Ides of March.
Beware the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March.
And as Caesar was walking to the Senate on the morning of that fateful day, he passed Spurina, the soothsayer, in the street. And he said, hey, the Ides of March have come. What's the problem? And Spurina said, aye, Caesar, but they have not yet gone. That was a true prophecy, as it turned out, because Caesar did go to the Senate, and as was planned, one of the conspirators pulled him aside to ask a favor. He pulled down Caesar's toga.
Take your hand off me.
Which was the signal. And then Caesar was surrounded by a crowd of conspirators who had concealed their daggers in their pen boxes, because of course you were not supposed to be armed in the Senate. And they, drew their daggers, and Casca was apparently the first to stab, but the accounts differ. Caesar may have had 35 or 36 wounds, or maybe 23. 23 is the canonical number. There are all kinds of really interesting parallels with other points in history, and particularly that how incredibly shocking it was to have this act of raw political violence right there in a meeting of the Senate. The reaction, in fact, was of total shock and dismay, and maybe as many as 60 senators were in on this. The assassination of Caesar ushers in a very confusing period of Roman history. You have 14 more years of upheaval and chaos. It's only when Caesar's heir, Octavian, finally defeats Antony and Cleopatra in the year 30 that things are set back on a firm footing, but not on a republican or democratic footing, but on an autocracy that kind of masqueraded under the guise of a restored republic.
Politics aside, it turns out Caesar had a lot to do with how we mark and think of time today.
The Roman calendar originally was a 355-day calendar. It was originally probably a lunar calendar where the months were measured by the phases of the moon. But the 355-day calendar doesn't really work because the solar year is 365 and a quarter days long. So the Romans had divided the year into 12 months, but they were falling short, so they kept falling behind.
2 years before his death, Caesar fixed the calendar.
When Caesar brought the calendar into true, when he lined up the civic calendar with the solar calendar, the year as the Romans observed it civically had gotten so far out of whack, it was like 3 months different. So in the year 46, as dictator, Caesar, he intercalated a month after February, and then he intercalated 2 more months between November and December, which ended up making the year 46 a 445-day year, which I think must have been so agonizing.
Anyone who's lived through 2020 may be able to relate to a year that feels like it's 445 days long.
Caesar's most lasting accomplishment is that he did reform the calendar, and we use Caesar's calendar today. Regardless of whether he was a political hero or whether he was a tyrant who had to be deposed by any means, necessary, we still live on Caesar's time.
This is Inside Edition Digital.